And thanks everyone for hanging in there. We got a fantastic comment at the end of our session that there is a bit of Zoom fatigue and we don't have, refreshments for you. There's no coffee, there's no cookie station. So we certainly understand in the late afternoon. So why don't we go ahead and get started and start with, let's turn it around this time. Jen, do you have someone from your group that may want to report out on your discussion?
So first of all, when you said refreshments, I thought happy hour. So that gives you a sense of where I am timing wise. And second, Celia was very generous. I really tried with the long pause to get a new voice, but Celia very kindly volunteered to give voice to another great discussion from our group. So Celia, please go ahead.
All right, Celia, can you, are you back?
Sorry.
Oh, there you are. Okay.
I guess I have Zoom fatigue and I forgot to unmute. I was talking to myself, but we started our session just with the comment that technology is not a tool in and of itself, but that there were a number of uses for technology in the current era. And we talked about a couple of them. One of them, which wasn't on the list, was about the value of technology potentially in the issue of transparency. And as we discussed in some of the earlier sessions, transparency drives trust. And when data can be shared back with the communities, they can use that data, for a number of reasons, to educate the community and also to improve their own requests for local funding sources for activities. And it's just important to share data back in the community. It's also important to share it back in a lay-friendly manner so that the community can understand it and understand the value. And also even the knowledge that it will be shared back can be beneficial. There were a couple comments about resources. We're talking about technology and these comments were a little broader than just technology, but what resources are available to the community. Not all communities have technology tools available to them. There may need to be some investment in developing those resources within the community. And also there's concern about how we're protecting individual information, which of course we have that in any trial, but even more so when you're talking about using a lot of sophisticated technology tools. People may not really understand what they're sharing when they're sharing their data. And I think the question was asked, what's in it for patients, technology? It's one more way to get data from patients, but what do they get out of it? And I think there was a comment that there's a general underappreciation for the role of communication, and we don't use the power of it enough. But also, community organizations that are asked for access to the data, there needs to be co-creation of a campaign to engage the community, and it might be considered as part of the budget when you're planning a trial. One really interesting comment I thought was the question of this: is technology in clinical trials a way to double down on the way that we mine communities for data? Or alternatively, do we use the technology that's going to be used in the clinical trial as a new tool in the toolbox to make it easier to work collaboratively with patients and communities? So the example was given of an app-based informed consent that might walk patients through all the issues. So I think that is an important point, and it really needs to be thought of with intentionality. Another topic that was covered was recruitment. So on the list was potentially advanced analytics for recruitment, patients to identify patients or do data mining to identify patients from underrepresented groups. But the alternative, there are other ways to use technology to identify patients. And I think some of the ones discussed included the fact that social media can make it easier to reach populations. You can have a town hall. And those types of collaborative methods of having patients learn about what you're doing and identify themselves can make it easier to engage patients and develop a protocol that's most appropriate for that community. Another topic that was discussed was we did hear about a number of best practices for use of technologies or initiatives for use of technologies, and how's that information disseminated? So just one thing that was mentioned was the CTSA program. One of their goals is to disseminate best practices in clinical trials. So I think that's a summary of, at a high level, of what we covered. I don't know if anybody has anything to add.
Well, that's great. I think in the interest of time, we'll move on to the next group, but thank you so much. That was really articulate. Why don't we go to the Skip's group, or a group that came together, maybe not Jen and not Pam. I don't know if, okay. Well, let's go on then to.
Yeah, Jean's got it. Good. Jean.
Oh, perfect. Okay, great.
Okay. Hi, everybody. That was a great report out. Thank you. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. So everybody felt the use of digital technology is critical. So I think that's important. There was a comment that we need to have direction now on saving samples and data for the cloud for the future. So we shouldn't kind of wait until that happens. We should have direction now on what samples and data we need to save for the future. So we're ready and populated with information at the time that those clouds are enabled. There's a disconnect, some people felt, with industry with respect to the use of new technologies in clinical trials. So the solution was that we might need to consider that the FDA give guidance on the use of technology in clinical trials. Also, we talked about how much is too much data. There was a discussion, everybody else probably had this discussion too, about what do we need to know about the patient versus what is must-have with respect to data collection. And this is especially the case with pediatric patients with rare diseases. There's over collection of data, and there needs to be a balance in terms of what is really needed to be known versus collecting everything and intensifying a poor interaction with families and caregivers. Data needs to be shared more broadly across researchers. We need standards, requirements, and incentives for doing this. That's an item with a big exclamation point. We must start with the outcomes that we want to change based on patient input, and then design data based on those outcomes. That's a bit disruptive as an approach, but that's truly patient-centered, patient-focused research. Start with what it is that you want to change, and then design the study and the data based on those outcomes with respect to data collection. We talked about privacy issues. How's the data being stored long-term is an important question to answer. The tools that are used for data collection need to be taught. They need to be health literate. They need to be understood before they're used. There needs to be some work done there. We talked about how to ensure patient engagement. Community advisory boards need to be assembled at lead sites. We're recommending a new phase 0. What usually happens now is there's a national group of patients and caregivers assembled for input for a given trial. To discuss the feasibility and implementation. Not good enough. Community advisory boards need to be assembled by lead sites. Please include caregivers always in these insights. Also, really good comment.
Just maybe our last comment, just in the interest of time. Sorry to cut you off there.
I think this is important. Doing patient preference experience studies are important as part of the clinical trial infrastructure. So I'll stop there and I'll give you my notes and follow up.
All right. Thank you so much. That was an excellent report out. Then let's go to Pam. Who's your repertoire from your group?
Great. So we had a great discussion, some of it about sticks and carrots, but I didn't have to use a stick to get another volunteer. And it's Sam who's going to be reporting out from our discussion.
Everyone. So we had a fantastic discussion in our group on the subject. And it really boils down to a few key themes. The first is that we've still got learning to do as an industry, both socializing things that we already know, but also building out guidance on how to use some of these technologies that do exist to build confidence for the industry. So themes of getting folks in clinical operations upskilled to be able to confidently use the new techs that we're deploying, having guidance from regulators as to what will be acceptable for a study so that sponsors can more confidently use these new technologies. And also getting consistent as an industry with how we use terms like decentralized trials so that we are clear about when we're talking about siteless initiatives versus things that are truly hybrid, which may be more common. But the good news is that we've also got a lot of places that we can go to learn. So one of the best gold mines that we have in front of us is the learning experiences from the work that has been done in COVID, where a lot of folks have brought to bear kind of courageous new methods to respond to the pandemic. And it's important that we don't let those lessons and insights kind of fall on the threshing room floor, but we learn how to translate those into our ongoing work so that we can take some of those pearls of wisdom and start to bring them to other therapeutic areas. We can also look outside of the United States. A couple countries that were brought up in our group are Denmark, Japan, which have great systems for data collection and making the data available for research. And particularly as we get to policy discussions, looking to some of those systems for inspiration as to how we can do better. Another very recurrent theme is that it's important not to blame shortcomings in technology for organizational problems. And so a lot of really what we're facing, the technology is there in so many ways, but what we're missing is the business models and confidence to be able to deploy it in the ways that it really can be used to great advantage. A couple of things that have been mentioned in our group. One is standardization. Particularly when we're interacting with the sites, seeking to build the tools that allow them to operate on their existing standards and to build in the mechanisms to translate after the fact where possible, so that we're not trying to push out new means of collecting the data into existing workflows and practices.
Yep. Sorry, Sam, to cut you off there. Maybe just to conclude that thought, and then we'll have Stephen's group just wrap up maybe in a minute and a half. Go ahead, Sam.
Yes, so a couple just very quick concluding thoughts. One is that we need to look at the right set of incentives. A upcoming CARES Act 2.0 might be a good place to do that. And as we build these systems of data aggregation, we need to think about what we might be missing and control for that in those studies.
All right, thank you so much. All right, Stephen, last word from your group.
Okay, Ed is going to summarize, and sorry to put pressure on you, but we're a little bit
Yes,
late,
so Ed Seguin, I'm the CEO of Clinical Link, and I beat out everybody for this, so I'll slim down my 15-minute summary to a minute. But we essentially focused on the idea of feedback necessary for patients, giving them something of value. One of the ways that could help accelerate that is if there were some clarity from the regulatory agencies about what timing, when do you give that feedback, of what type, so that everyone's not hunting around wanting to do something good, but not knowing exactly how to go about doing that. There was another theme of making sure that technology has to fit into their daily life. There was a comment about making sure that in deciding what technology to use, that we don't just go off of some assumptions and past knowledge about whether elderly people are inclined to do it or inner city people have access to the technology and internet or not, that we actually figure out answers before making some of those decisions that involved with making those technology choices. And other than that, we talked about everything else that everybody else did. So group one was really, really good.
Well, thank you so much for that. And as we wrap up, I'm going to turn it over to Stephen to help summarize the day, no small task, and then we will talk about the next workshop. Stephen?